Hello and welcome, one and all, to the SuperShow podcast, episode number 222 or 222. There are cooler ways of saying that. I'm your host for this week, Jamie, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Alex Jones. Delighted because after an incredibly busy summer schedule of holidays and illnesses, do you know what, Jonesy? It finally feels like the podcast is back to normal. It's back on track. In fact, since our last episode, it's only been 6 days, or as PlayStation would refer to it, around half the lifespan of Concord. And that's the end of the kind of the stand-up comedy portion of the podcast. I promise that there will be no more. I was thinking about what's the deal with Concord food, but that felt like one step too far. Jonesy, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm sad for Concord, but
Me too. Me too.
Is what it is.
I'm feeling equal amounts sadness, but also shock because as we will get into, PlayStation have made I'm going to call it the unprecedented move to take Concord, their latest live service hero shooter, totally offline in dramatic fashion. I believe Scorched Earth is how you referred to it, Jonesy, when you were doing the title and thumbnail for this one.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'm not really sure we've seen anything like that, like it before. So we're going to go into the ins and outs of it, what it might mean for Concord and the future of the game, and perhaps more importantly, what it might mean for you if you're one of the very small handful of souls that paid the asking price for this title. And it's interesting that we're going to be talking about PlayStation and some of the movements that they're going to be making, because we're also going to be chatting a little bit about the rest of the moves that PlayStation are going to make this very month. You know, we've got Astrobot around the corner, lots of eyes on the big blue machine and what it might do next, especially as there have been some hot new rumors straight off the press around the PlayStation 5 Pro or a potential PlayStation 5 Pro and what it might look like. So if you enjoy podcasts where two people try and describe an image that you can't see, then stay tuned for that one. And we're also going to be talking a little bit more at the end of the show about Remedy, Control 2, Alan Wake, and their future with their new partners Annapurna, and what it might mean for you film lovers out there, for all you fans of Kino who want to see characters like Alan Wake or Faden from Control be recast as Hollywood stars who feels completely out of place because of how lifelike and good the portrayals already were. You can look forward to that in the near future. But Jonesy, let's rock on back to Concord. We learnt today, in the timeliest of fashions, that that following Concord's release on August 23rd, just 11 days ago, I think, as at the time of recording, we've now know that Concord is going offline, and as I said, it's doing so in pretty spectacular fashion. Sony are pulling, and PlayStation are pulling the game from sale from every storefront, certainly every digital storefront. You bought it retail, and if you bought it physically at a retail location, or whether you bought it on one of those digital storefronts, you're going to get a full refund because the game won't even be playable. It is going offline this Friday, the 6th of September. Even if you're having a whale of a time with Concord and you're ignoring all the haters, you will not even be able to play it anymore. Jonesy, there were rumors earlier in the week that Concord might have sold as few as 25,000 copies, which is, again, it's eye-wateringly bad, which, you combine that with some of the Steam stats that we were talking about last week. I still feel reluctant to say, though, that the writing was on the wall for Concord, because this feels... I just didn't think this would happen.
It seems bizarre. It's for one time, it actually seems that the naysayers were right. I think often we talk about games and how they're looking in development, and then it seems like, but they still managed to sell, a couple of million copies because it was still from a big studio. It's still from it's still first party fare, so it's not that surprising. But for this to do as badly as it's done, to sell as few copies as it has done, and I will say I think 25,000 sounds punchy given the fact that it was peaking on Steam at 500. It's more than I thought. If you're one of those people that actually paid money for this game, you'd think that you would, in the first sort of 2 weeks, that you would have been playing the game, but apparently not. that is dire for a game that's been in production for sort of like 8 years, I believe, and full price title coming out on PlayStation 5. Yeah, rough, insanely rough. I think unfairly so. Is that? Do you know what I mean? Because I've played it. We both played the beta, right? It didn't grab me. It didn't make me want to play more of it. But I'm not that surprised at that. Overwatch 2 didn't make me want to play any more of it. But the fact that this missed so hard on its target audience, which is, let's be honest, it probably isn't me. I'm not that surprised. But I'm surprised that it didn't resonate with anybody, seemingly.
I am surprised as well. Like you said, I thought that it had enough things going for it. Even just like you mentioned, the fact that it is a first-party PlayStation Studios title. They got prominent placement on everything from the showcase last summer through to a fairly recent state of play. I think we even got follow-ups where we saw more of the narrative cinematics that they were trying to push hard for the game, which itself was another hook where you thought maybe they were trying to tap into some of the existing PlayStation Studios output fans and like the kind of things that they're drawn towards. But you're right. It's just remarkable seeing something miss the mark so much, and remarkable seeing something that isn't necessarily of poor quality. I know some people have tried to turn around today and say this has happened because Concord's bad, but I think the sentiment still generally is no, Concord's not bad. Concord doesn't do anything particularly wrong. It's just remarkable how few things Concord clearly was doing right. And it's a little bit tricky to get into like terms like fair and unfair, because the video games industry is consistently unfair. But this, does feel like a unique case where it's hard not to feel sorry for the clearly very talented people who poured a lot of themselves into this product, and it just didn't find an audience. Not like you said, not just didn't find an audience, but didn't find an audience in spectacular fashion. To the point where I think the other wrinkle of this story is PlayStation aren't even trying to breathe life into it. I think I can't remember which way round it is, and I know the two things are polar opposite. But is it a thing that like when people die drowning, it's actually like weirdly silent and you often don't even notice, or is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, people always think it's splashy and loud, but it's apparently not.
Yeah. But I think, though, to have exactly what you said, when I picture myself drowning, I imagine myself going down, in a blaze of glory. Its arms failing, its legs going everywhere. I'm screaming my head off. If I'm drowning, someone's going to know about it. And usually, when games are drowning, it is that thing. It's that, what are the splashes? What are the yells for help? And it's like, what if we had a free weekend? Or, what if we tried to, or, what if we rejigged our advertising campaign? Or what if we had a week where we paid a load of influencers to get involved and start playing it? What if we really heavily incentivized play? What if we did a thing where hey, Concord is free to play for the next week, and if you play it inside the next week, then once the week is over, you can buy it for a quarter of the price. There are things that you can do if all you want to do is recoup as much money as possible. And it's fascinating to me that PlayStation haven't tried any of them. They're doing the opposite of trying to recoup money by giving people refunds that they didn't even ask for.
Yes, yeah. I don't like to, because in your analogy, Concord being the silently drowning, I don't think it's the death of Concord though. I think what we've actually had is almost the opposite. I think they don't want Concord to die. They've put so much time and effort into it. They have to save it. So I think they're not even gonna get to the point of floundering, splashing, trying to do something. I think it's just going to be gone for a couple of months maybe, and then it comes back free to play with a new, some sort of earning structure. To that surely that's what it has to be. There's no way that this is the end for Concord and we're not going to see it again. It's going to come back in, and I think the only way it comes back and it could be, a pretty incredible resurrection story is that it comes back free to play, and then you get to the point of then with all the other that sort of game, it's like, well, hey, it's free to play. I might as well download it. I might as well give it a try. Then it will find an audience, and then you've just got the issue of okay, well, how are they monetizing it? How is that looking? Are they going to introduce a number of elements to try and recoup costs that way? What do you think? Do you think it comes back free to play?
Yes, at the end of the day, I think is the straight up answer to that. And what you're theorizing does track with the actual statements we've got that came from Ryan Ellis, who was a game director at Firewalk Studios. If I can read the quote briefly, he said, "We've been listening closely to your feedback since the launch of Concord on PS5 and PC, blah, blah, blah. Thank everyone who joined on the journey, passionate community support, blah, blah, blah." Then he gets to the important part. "However, while many qualities of the experience resonated with players, we also recognize that other aspects of the game and our initial launch didn't land the way we'd intended. Therefore, at this time, we've decided to take the game offline beginning September 6th and explore options, including those that will better reach our players." It's hard not to read that and hypothesize anything other than a free-to-play return or relaunch for Concord, because the kind of the time to free to play clock was already ticking this time last week when we were discussing how it launched out of the gates. I guess then my question is, yes, it will take a little bit of time to kind of maybe rejig their seasonal content and rejig their pricing structures and their content rollout for a free to play audience. But is that enough based on the actual lukewarm reaction to the game, how people aren't responding to these characters, how the shooting is solid but not best in class? When we talk about the level of competition that will still be there and those games will also still be free, is that enough?
Yes.
Okay. What makes you think so?
It makes me because I want to say, if I remember rightly, did they say there was 2,500 people played the open beta that they had? Was it something like that?
I think the
maybe
concurrence
more.
might have. I feel like the concurrence might have got to that kind of number on Steam, but obviously it never quite got anywhere near that once it was for sale.
And then you've got 25,000 people that have apparently bought it, is the sort of number we're talking about. So realistically, there are tens of millions of people who are gamers who would play this kind of game who've never touched it. Who,
correct?
I think when you're looking at a quality piece, because even if you say like it's it's a lukewarm shooter, it doesn't do anything particularly well. I think just the quality of production of that kind of piece of media is going to find an audience in a free to play market. I think that's kind of how. That surely is the only way that it survives, and I think it will. I don't think it's going to get a big audience. We've looked at a load of games in the past that have done. Even look at something like Avengers. I mean, on the games as a service side of that, not good at all, but it still had people playing. It still was making some money. I don't see a world where this doesn't, as a free to play game, I don't see a world where this doesn't hit like, I'm gonna have a bash. Like let's say like upwards up to like 1 million players.
But that would be a failure.
It would be a failure. I don't think this becomes a success, but I think it becomes I think it might be able to wash its own face if you can get that 1 million players to actually want to stick with it long enough to sink enough money into it. But yeah, I kind of don't see how this is ever not a failure.
That's the thing, and because we're talking about something like the Avengers, and it's easy to look back on something like the Avengers as a failure and as a live service title. But in terms of numbers, like Concord makes games like Marvel's Avengers look like some of the biggest successes of all time. While we've been chatting, I was looking up X-Defiant's numbers,
right? Because
X-Defiant has been in the news in the past week because there's been some suggestion from Tom Henderson, who is usually fairly in the know when it comes to Ubisoft matters, that maybe X-Defiant is struggling a little bit and they don't really know what to do with it. X-Defiant hit a billion. They wouldn't be struggling if that was the case. They would have cracked China. X-Defiant had over 1 million players in its beta, but when it came out and was free to play, it reached over 11 million players.
Yeah,
and that was in June. We're in September now, and articles are starting to be written, being like, "Oh, what's next for X-Defiant?" My major concern here is that a free-to-play Concord is still Concord, and it doesn't move the needle for anyone or anything.
I think you're right. I do think it. So I don't think it can ever succeed necessarily as it is, but I think it could be not as much of an absolute disaster as it currently is. Like at this point, it has to be on course to be like the biggest failure in modern video game history. Like and we're in the same year that Suicide Squad was released. So
that's the thing. Yeah, it's because like you said, games like Suicide Squad and Avengers, they actually sold a reasonable number of they didn't recoup the costs. Like when you compare it to development budgets, maybe it's trickier, but you're right, like they sold much more than this. And also because like a lot of the other biggest failures out of the gates have had redemption arcs, and like or they create the pathway for those redemption arcs. When you talk about No Man's Skies of the world and Cyberpunks of the world, like they managed to grab a hold of their stories, of the narratives around those games, and turn them around. I don't think Concord has a scruff of the neck to be grabbed. It's floundering. I think the fact that we're sitting here talking about this and how unprecedented the move they've made today is, I think cements, that makes what you said accurate. Like it's one of the biggest and most high profile, disasters of this nature we've maybe ever seen.
It's a weird one because in some respects, as a first party title from PlayStation Studios, I don't think they did enough work up for this game as it was. We got to see cinematic trailers, we got to see some gameplay trailers. I don't think there was enough build to this being released. Like I don't think there was enough drummed up. We were told about it. Then we had a cinematic trailer that was completely separate from the game and was supposed to introduce you to these characters. But I just don't feel like they ever did enough about the core gameplay and building on the, what, as a hero shooter, what makes it different? What is going to make you want to play this? And so when it came out, I don't think anyone had any reason to go and play this over anything else. Like there was a myriad different way. For me, the real failure here is the marketing team who should have done a better job of getting this out there, pushing it, giving you reasons to want to experience it, and basically saying like we're gonna do these vignettes about characters and talk about but if no one cares the day the game comes out, why are they going to care in the future once the game is out? Like you can't just say this is what we're gonna do. Like you have to give me a reason to play the thing in the first place. Right. And it's a shame because it was I think the cinematic trailer was the first thing of Concord that I saw. I was like, oh, this looks really interesting and really cool. And then, as we've said, you then see a mediocre, hero shooter that doesn't seem to do anything different than a bunch of other games that are coming out and free to play. I should say I said it was a full price game. It's not. What is it? It's like you actually put the cost here. I think it's £35. Did you say?
Yeah, $40.
£40, so it's like half price, but that's still for a game where you have many very good free to play options is still too much.
Yes,
it is a weird one. It is a strange one. It's a big old fumble.
No, and I think you're absolutely right to bring up the marketing. Your first impressions are also incredibly valuable in this day and age, and I think this made a pretty rough one. I'm kind of overlooking when it technically debuted at the showcase last year because that was, a glorified logo reveal. I'm talking about when it was at that state of play a handful of months ago, and while you kind of enjoyed that cinematic, I was in the camp of people that actually didn't really enjoy that cinematic. And I was just feeling I was watching this, like I said, a little vignette starring a bunch of characters who all seem like analogs for characters from Guardians of the Galaxy, getting up to hijinks that I didn't particularly care about. And it was a double whammy, because not only did I not care, but it was also eating up time in a state of play show that I knew the running time of. And I do that thing where I sit there and go, every minute I'm spent watching Concord is a minute less of reveals later on the show. And it was the thing that PlayStation did in May that replaced their showcase slot from the year before, and people had big expectations. I have a question for you. Do you think one of the big failures of this, because I suspect this a little bit, is that when it started development, if it had come out within a couple of years, it would have been absolutely fine. But because we're sort of in a different space now, it's almost like you just didn't get this game out fast enough. I think that's certainly possible. I think it was last week on the podcast, wasn't it, when we ran the numbers, and it was like, well, if this game's been in development for 8 years, that means it started development when Overwatch came out. And who could say the extent to which those two things were related? But I don't think that's necessarily the problem. Like, we're going to have a podcast inside the next 3.5, 4 months where we talk about how many millions of players Marvel Rivals has got inside its first weekend, week, month, and so on and so forth. Marvel Rivals is a weird case because, well, one, it's the Marvel IP. It's that license, and it's one of the biggest and most recognizable in sort of like modern media nowadays, especially amongst the kind of audience of gamers that they're going after. And the other one is backed by NetEase, I think, who have a lot of experience and a lot of history with kind of how to handle the rollout of a free-to-play live service multiplayer title. So it's apples and oranges to a certain extent, but that will still be a hero shooter that will eat Concord's lunch. And so I don't think it's necessary. Yes, Concord does suffer from the thing of development times are longer than they've ever been. It is remarkable that this game took 8 years, and the market is undoubtedly massively different upon its release compared to when they were first envisioning the kind of product that Concord would be. But it's not the be-all and end-all. Because with hero shooters, they did back a market that hasn't actually died yet. It's not like something like Bungie and Marathon, where they were like, we've seen what's happening with Escape from Tarkov. We think extraction shooters are going to be the next battle royale, and we're all sat here going in 2024 and going, not only are extraction shooters not the next battle royale, no one wants to play an extraction shooter. So it's not as big a miss of the market trend as that was, or could end up being. We'll see. But it's still not a great one.
No. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's. I suppose it's easy to like look and say, oh, this is the issue. But if it was that easy to identify the problem, then they wouldn't have made this mistake in the first place. I suppose. I guess at the end of the day,
what else are you going to do? If games take 8 years to make right now, every single game that ever enters development is a guess, especially if it's a multiplayer one. Like, you have to guess. And
you do.
The best guess you can make is the one that's informed by what's going on at the moment, and hoping that it stays the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose for me, it just seems a bit like if you have an idea that your game's going to be in development for 8 years and you're basing it on a game which has come out and is very successful, you should look back 8 years and see what people were playing 8 years before you made that decision. Because chances are, but if what I'm saying is, if you when they started production of this, if they went back to 2000 and look what people playing, they could have said to themselves, "Wow, the landscape was very different. Are we sure this is the one to go for?"
What was that? Call of Duty World at War 2008? Was that?
No,
that was 8 years before.
Yeah, I'm trying. I can't remember. Maybe.
I think it was 07 was Modern Warfare, then 08 World at War, then 09.
So it's all about zombies. So we had the first zombies in World at War.
Yeah. So really, they should have made a zombies clone. Which, I mean...
No, I'm not saying you go back and make the thing from 8 years. I'm just saying like they should have said, it was very different. Maybe we shouldn't sink all this money into this.
Then the solution you walk away with is like you do that research and you say all our research suggests that we shouldn't guess what's going to happen in the next 8 years, and we've come to the conclusion we shouldn't make a video game. And then no one makes any game ever.
You should make a video game, but you should just make the best damn video game you can, and you should make it not try and copy other people. You should make your own thing. Think about things like Fortnite or GTA 5, the very what's the word? Like games that made a lot of money, that had a massive turnover, that have been very, very successful, very lucrative. Thank you. And they didn't come out and didn't copy anything really before them. They were kind of their own thing. To be fair, in respect to Fortnite, obviously there was other battle royale games, but they weren't thinking that aspect of their game wasn't going to be the bit that was going to make them any money.
No, it was Fortnite Save the World or whatever it was called, where that weird and then they were like, "Oh shit, this didn't really go that well. Can we implement a battle royale mode really quickly?" So quickly that Bluepoint and PUBG tried to sue Epic and Fortnite for a little while there, and that was a lawsuit that was always doomed to failure, but still a fascinating time.
Yeah.
Do you know what, Jonesy? Like, what? I'm going to say it. I know that, at the end of the day, everyone likes to make money. And the things that make big money, and not just big money, but more and more they make big money, year on year on year on year on year, seemingly indefinitely, are the Minecrafts and the Robloxes and the Fortnites and the GT, and so that's why everyone wants to make them. And so I get it, but like which trend still hasn't died?
What's that?
Really good single player games. Turns out people still like them.
Although, was it a few years ago when they were like the single player is dead, and then they weren't dead.
Said that.
That's it, and then they weren't dead.
Yeah. EA cancelled a single player Star Wars game, said single player games were dead, and a few years later started making single player Star Wars games.
Yeah,
that were better received than their multiplayer Star Wars games. Although I'd imagine the Battlefront game still sold better than the Jedi series did. I actually don't know the numbers on that. I'd be interested to know, but I'm not going to do that because I'm in the middle of podcasting.
I will just flag it as Rodrigo in chat said, Save the World was the main game for Fortnite. It was a zombie-based defense, hence the building. Do you know something? Here's a little tidbit of interesting information. I saw the trailer for the zombie defense aspect of Fortnite and thought that looked wicked and was really looking forward to playing it, and it obviously never came off and then never got to play it and was sad.
Yeah, I never played it either, but that's only because I had no interest in it. And also because unless I'm getting my timelines completely skewed up, I remember there being a brief time in my life where I constantly got Fortnite confused with Firewatch, which is an outrageous thing to say in the year 2024. But there was a time where that was a thing that you could say and not be crazy.
Sounds similar.
Well, because I think there was a time when both of them were announced and neither of them were out. I want to say the word Fortnite was something that Epic were saying for a long time before it ended up being everything that it ended up being. But again, I can't fact check that on the fly. Either way, a significantly more popular game than Concord. And,
indeed.
I guess whilst you could, if you own the game, theoretically continue to play it for the next 3 days or so, we at the SuperShow podcast would like to take this opportunity to say rest in peace for now to Concord, until it presumably rises from the dead in a free-to-play fashion at some point in the not-too-distant future.
If I had to push you to predict how it's going to perform when it gets re-released, where do you... my thinking at the moment is that it's going to get hate-bombed when it tries to come back, and it's going to do really badly because of it. What do you think? What does your gut say?
I worry the same. Like, we're going to talk about a game later on that I've been playing a little bit about, and I'm curious to kind of share my thoughts, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts when I know you've gotten around to playing it as well. That like every now and then I go online and I accidentally glimpse like something that has somehow made it onto my feed, as it were, on X, the Everything app, and I'm like, that's really what people are talking about, or that's what they're angry about, or that's what they're complaining about. And it reminds me how much I hate video game discourse and actively try and shy away from it at all possible opportunities. But the thing that it reinforces is that now every single weekend when a new relatively big game is releasing, it feels like a coin toss over whether or not it will be like grabbed and co-opted by some kind of online movement or group or whatever, and like made to be like the game that we hate this week, the game whose casket we dance on this week,
right?
And I fear that Firewatch is kind of already Firewatch. Concord, yeah, it's on my mind clearly. Concord is already that, and I think you're right. I think it will still be when it comes back, where Concord comes back and those characters come back, and it's the same. Look at this game; it's DEI, and there's a fat woman in it. So let's all get angry at Concord and laugh at Concord and not play Concord. Oh, look, the games journalists all love Concord because they all love inclusion. What are we doing here, folks? What are we?
But one thing that I think is interesting, because that sort of stuff, I think that does, obviously that happens, but in reality, I think it doesn't really move the needle. Like the whole DEI thing, when it comes to sales, I think that doesn't actually have much of an effect against about typical person who buys game, like doesn't see that stuff. We often talk about like our viewers, everything, or we are probably the terminally online. We listen and we read up and think about things far too much when it comes to video games, and most people simply don't. But that's what I do find interesting about Concord is this didn't even hit a nerve with like Joe Blogs, who just wants to play a good game. Like they didn't even feel it. It would be maybe a sadder and more interesting world if the Discord around like DEI and fat woman in game means I'm not playing. Like it would be a different world. I don't think we really live in that world. Thankfully, I'm joking. It wouldn't be more interesting. It'd be pretty horrible.
Some people are trying pretty hard to convince us that we do.
I don't think it has any effect. I think this is just a badly timed, badly marketed misstep that didn't hit for a lot of people.
No, I agree.
Maybe because September's such an amazing month for games as well.
I mean, it is one of those things where they have, they did choose a slightly awkward release schedule where anyone who was looking at their calendar of things that they were looking forward to in the month, let's say 5 to 6 weeks following the launch of Concord, would have probably seen an incredible amount of games to look forward to. My most anticipated game of the year comes out in 3 days. And I've only started playing one of the 2 games that were on my to-play list when we were sat here this time last week. So it's fast-moving, and we're going to do our darndest to keep on top of it, because that's our duty to you, the Super Show listeners. Whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're listening on audio podcasting platforms like Spotify, iTunes, or Google Podcasts, or whether you're with us watching live on the YouTube live stream, we appreciate you being here and listening to us ramble about video games. Shall I thank the patrons? Is that what I do at this point in the show?
I think you should. I think they're a good bunch. I think they'd appreciate it.
They are a good bunch. There's the reason that, like, there's okay, I was going to say, there's the reason I can afford to occasionally buy a new video game every now and then and come on the podcast and talk about it, but not quite the reason that I can afford to buy every video game that comes out and come on the podcast and talk about it. Hence why neither Jonesy nor I own Concord. But if you'd like to fix that and make sure that we have enough money to buy games that we don't even want in the future, then you can head over to patreon.com/supershow. Over there, you'll find a range of different tiers, all with a variety of rewards, whether you're looking for Discord access, whether you're looking for patron-exclusive content, patron-exclusive videos and podcasts, all kinds of shit that we've made, not just recently, but over the many years of the Super Show. Then you could head over to, once again, patreon.com/Super Show. And a small disclaimer before I thank the people who have gone over there and done that. We don't actually spend the money that you give us on video. It's not some weird thing where, like, this is just a big scheme for us to get free games. I'd love it if we got free games, but the video games PR don't apparently like us anymore like they used to when we had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So we just do it the old-fashioned way. We work jobs, we save up, we occasionally buy them. There's some names. Some of them are on screen right now. I'd like to thank those people. If you can see your name, you should know I'm grateful. I don't know what's happening, Josie. I'd also like to give a personal shout-out to some further people. They include Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Icenaut Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Pastors Guild, and Xander GTI. And then, of course, we have the big dogs, the members of the board. I was trying to think of like a way to tie it into Concord, something that maybe like a little bit of a pun action. I got nothing. Their names: Brett Z, aka Shell Shock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Mr. Jones, do you know what?
What?
I'm halfway through a Monster Energy Nitro, and I think I'm losing my mind. I don't really know why. The power of the podcast has clearly gotten to me, and I don't really know what I'm saying or doing anymore. Is it obvious?
Not at all. It's the caffeine. You're juiced up.
I maybe am a little bit juiced up. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'll say it anyway because I need every excuse I can get right now. I am also on new medication, and I'm not like a person. I've never been on medication in my life, and I'm on a kind of medication now, and so I'm experiencing all the highs and lows. I will say by highs and lows, I am mostly referring to either one of or both of, even though they do sound contradictory, diarrhea or constipation. Those are the major highs and lows, but apparently delirium could be added to the list. I'll let my doctor know.
These are the side effects: maybe diarrhea, constipation, and delirium. Oh, great!
Yeah, they didn't put that. They didn't put that on the list unless this is like a nausea-induced delirium, in which case I have been warned, and it's my fault for going live on the internet. Should we talk about video games, Jonesy? I've been playing one.
I really want to hear about the one you've been playing.
Okay, well, I hope I can bring forth some interesting opinions and talking points then. But I don't know that I've got that much to say that you might not have heard already elsewhere on the internet. That, you know, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that, you know, I think I share a lot of opinions that might have been, spread elsewhere. But I've played about 5 or 6 hours or so of Star Wars Outlaws, the brand new third-person open-world action-adventure Star Wars game from Ubisoft Massive, starring noted scoundrel Kay Vess, who, again, apparently I got told on good authority, Jonesy, by the internet, is the ugliest video game protagonist of all time, and they made her uglier during development on purpose because of DEI. No, it's input. That's what they did, okay? And I won't hear otherwise. But luckily for you, because this is a third-person action-adventure game, you will spend most of your time with Star Wars Outlaws staring at the back of Kay Vess's head and not having to see how ugly she is for yourself as she goes around, from as far as I can tell, sneaking and stealing things.
How is she ugly?
She's not.
I'm just looking at pictures of her. She's quite cute.
I think, again, certain, Twittery, I should say X types, got a bit of a bee in their bonnet over whether or not she was ugly, or I think I might be mistaken, but I believe some people think that she got made uglier during the fact. I don't really. I know I keep throwing that audience and that community a bone. I don't mean to.
So there's a couple. Yeah. I'm looking at some images here. There are some images where it looks like the actress that is based on. If you look at like a side by side, the model of Kay Vess looks worse than the model, which is obviously a bit weird because if you just mapped her face, then you would. But then it's not that face. Like, you're developing the character, and do you know what I can absolutely imagine? Maybe I'm giving them too much credence here. I can imagine a world where they say, "Do you know what? We need to be more." Have more real people, so we're going to ugly up a character that started off quite attractive because it's based on a pretty actress. Sorry, but not supposed to say actress. I got told that this week. A pretty female actor. In which case, I suppose I can see it, and then maybe you say, like, "Oh, we want her to be a bit rough around the edges. We don't want her to be too attractive because it's a bit weird, and that's in that environment." I don't know if I quite buy that because. That if you ever watch any TV show, everyone is insanely attractive, and it doesn't make any. Like, use some of the worst jobs in a TV show, and everyone in it is like a stunning model type, which is obviously ludicrous.
Right.
But at the same time, like, if you're making a game, I can see why you might want to make the main character look less perfect. You might want she's an outlaw on the outer rims trying to survive. She shouldn't look all polished and too cute and da 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 da. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, but then, I don't know, like, in kind of like Han Solo-ish fashion, unsurprisingly, they don't really hit the scoundrel thing, that hard.
Right.
Like, yes, she is fundamentally a morally dubious character, in the same way plenty of other characters across the Star Wars stories have been, in the sense that she kills people, she steals things, and she's, broadly speaking, out for herself, and she is more than willing to work with some pretty bad people to get what she wants. But, they throw a couple of quirks and a couple of, jokes and one-liners in there, some backstory about her relationship with her mum, and all of a sudden she becomes a charming, redeemable character. You're not really meant to focus on the fact that, in the grand scheme of things, she's a criminal.
Right.
It's that classic Star Wars thing. But, in terms of actually playing Star Wars Outlaws, I will say that, again, with the caveat that it's only been 5 or 6 hours, I've actually had a really good time. I've been really enjoying my time with it. I'm not feeling any of the fatigue I worried I would feel as someone who keeps up to date with pretty much all of Ubisoft's third-person action-adventure output, all the way up to this time last year, where I played and finished Assassin's Creed Mirage and I kind of had to drag myself through that experience towards the latter end of it. As even for a shorter Assassin's Creed game, I felt like it ran out of steam a little bit. That's not my way of saying I don't think that this has a lot of shared DNA with some of Ubisoft's other offerings. I'm just not feeling much of, again, the fatigue that you would assume would be there based on my familiarity with those other games. And I think that's because a lot of the Star Warsification of that formula helps make this feel fresh. Like when you are
Right.
whether whether you're exploring the surface of all of these planets, or messing with the different factions, or messing with the Empire and going up against like stormtroopers and going through all their bases and hideouts and stealing shit, and there's a hell of a lot of stealth in this game. I will say that this is more of a stealth game than it is a third-person cover shooter, to the point where it's almost not a third-person cover shooter at all. There are certain scenarios where it's like, hey, we're going to be a cover shooter now for the next 90 seconds, so that's why there's guns all around you, that's why we just gave you 3 grenades, and that's why there are explosive red barrels everywhere. But most of the time it's a stealth game. But I've enjoyed getting to know some of these factions and some of these groups, and I've enjoyed sneaking around back alleys and trying to find little vents to find ways into areas that I'm not allowed into, and stealing all their shit and selling it, and then using that money to upgrade my speeder or buy parts for my blaster. That loop or that cycle has been fun so far. The story hasn't really done anything particularly interesting, because it's mostly been introducing me to the various factions that Kay can and will be working with. It hasn't really, in my time with the game yet, kind of set the groundwork for the big heist that I understand is to come. But it's been fun. I don't really have much of an issue with it. I don't think it's incredible, but I think it's been really solid. And I'm not even a crazy big Star Wars fan. I'm just more of a sort of a distant admirer more than anything else when it comes to the Star Wars films specifically.
So one of the interesting things I like watching Skill Up's reviews often of games. I sometimes don't agree with him. I think I'm not quite. I don't know. I just don't necessarily agree with everything he says about every game, but sometimes I think he absolutely nails it. And one of the things I thought was kind of interesting about his review for this was it made me feel a little bit. This is a weird way to put it, but it made me feel similar to how his review of Guardians of the Galaxy made me feel, in that it's like a game which is by no means perfect, has a lot of issues, but actually is good that it exists, and there's a lot of fun to be had with it, even with the problems. Do you reckon that's is the reason I'm feeling the same thing for does it make sense? Is this a similar game in the sense of it has?
I don't know that it is similar for me in terms of at least the way I responded to Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
Like Guardians of the Galaxy was more of a surprise out of the gates because, it was, I guess there wasn't that much of a precedence for a direct adaptation of something that we'd already had some pretty good movies based on the source material for, a studio that had made good games in the past, but it was this weird mix of this, Guardians had a lot going on. You look at the combat, for example, of controlling Star-Lord one-to-one, but issuing command for all the other characters at the same time. And you look at the emphasis they were placing on narrative, and how a lot of the wisecracking and comedy, if it wasn't well written, it could have completely fallen on its face.
Yep.
Guardians of the Galaxy for me was more of a consistent, pleasant surprise. I don't know that Star Wars Outlaws has been surprising to me in any real way.
Right.
I think I've gotten what I expected to get from it. I'm just glad that I'm enjoying it in the way that I am. And I don't know if I'm necessarily enjoying it because it's that noteworthy. If you were to ask me to go back to old school GameSpot days and break this down by components and give graphics, gameplay, blah, 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 sound scores out of 10, some of those numbers might actually be pretty low from a critical perspective, but it doesn't really matter all that much for some reason. Right. At least not in the time that I've spent with it thus far. The rubber might hit the road at some point, and I'll be I'm starting to lose the motivation to continue to, be a scoundrel and to see where Kay's story goes. Especially because, again, in terms of world building and the introduction of new or exciting or funny or clever characters, there hasn't been that much yet. I've kind of just been sustained by the gameplay loop thus far. So I don't know if it's got that longevity, but for the time being, I feel okay about it. I think that some of the gameplay might wear out its welcome, though. In particular, I mentioned the stealth. For a game that relies as much as it does on stealth, to the point where this is the first game I've remember playing, at least in a little while, that has instant fail stealth sections. That caught me off guard. I thought the stealth would be a little bit more robust, not just in sort of like how it functions and some of the kind of, we're all used to stealth that's a little bit funky around the edges, like vision cones that are sometimes tiny and sometimes massive, and like, are they going to move the second I get just within range of a stealth knockout or whatever? Is this person going to hear me knocking out their friend if they're 3 feet to their right and 1 foot behind? Like, am I in that? Some of that stuff is a little bit funky, and sometimes it feels like it's consistent, sometimes it's not. I guess I'm just a little bit disappointed that Ubisoft have made some of my favorite stealth action games in the last decade or so, and when I go back to, I don't know why it's one that I think about a lot, but something like Watch Dogs 2, the number of options you have to make your way through those encounters by the end of that game, whether it's with your little car or whether you're like your little RC car, or whether you're like controlling actual cars and driving them into people, or setting traps so that when they walk across a certain thing, a big electrical thing. So you can do some of that with Nix, your little sidekick, where you can be like, go and set off that explosive barrel or go and sabotage that alarm. But I'm just surprised that there's not a little bit more like room for fun and room for like stealth. One of the stealth is at its best for me when it doesn't have to be empowering, and you don't have to be like some crazy powerful, like, you have to feel like you're in control of the situation, like the Arkham games. Like one of the best touches in the Arkham games, I always thought, was the fact that when you enter that like detective vision mode, you could see their heart rates, because it was like that. It brought to life that feeling of like, you're in control of the situation, you're fucking with them, they don't know what's going on, like, and what's going to happen next. And I love that like that kind of anarchist kind of approach to stealth, where you're just like, these guys have no idea what's going on. They have no idea why this car just reversed out of nowhere and ran over 3 people. Meanwhile, that barrel over there exploded, and they're all running around. I love that, and there's not a lot of that in Star Wars. It's a lot of like, no, I'm going to sort of like wait to see where people are walking and where people are looking, and I'm going to make a path, a route up through here, and I'm going to press square when I get behind people to knock them out, and and I hope I hit a checkpoint.
Which is
again.
Which, I mean, if you're a scoundrel, you can't just be sneaking everywhere. It's not like what a scoundrel. There should be multiple ways about dealing with different situations and that. And I've heard that this game is a stealth game from one of the top stealth game manufacturers, the stealth isn't particularly good, and a cover shooter in some aspects from a developer who's very good at cover shooters. And again, the cover shooting is not great. So it's apparently it's kind of surprising so then it kind of surely is on purpose in some respects. Do you think maybe they've just tried to get a feel for Kay and they've just kind of missed, as opposed to just, because there's not really, it can't be possible they've just done it badly. They're so good at doing this stuff. So it must be choices they've actually specifically made to have the game operate like it does.
I suppose so. I think I could definitely see that argument on the third person shooter side, where they're like, you look at all the approach they take to weapons in this game. So Kay has this blaster that you can do some upgrades for, and you can swap out modules for, that allow it to be a little bit more, varied in the kind of results it produces as a blaster. But it is always still just a blaster. This is a character who has a handgun on them at all times, and that's basically it. And you can pick up other people's weapons, but almost anything you do, from a stealth knockout to climbing up a wall to entering into a vent, almost anything you do, she drops the weapon she's holding that you've picked up. And so clearly, like, that's a choice that you make when you're trying to de-emphasize an element of like, hey, pick up this stormtrooper's machine gun and mow everyone down.
Right.
I think that's also reinforced by the fact that I mentioned there are instant fail stealth sections where if an alarm gets raised, it's game over. Like, clearly they're trying to make Kay, they're trying to emphasize that Kay is this kind of sneaky scoundrel who, when going up against the might of the Empire, she has to walk around barrels and punch people in the back of the head. She can't go balls out. So yeah, that probably was a choice, and that's maybe why there's not much Division DNA in Star Wars Outlaws. The stealth, I still think that they could have had more fun with it, and it wouldn't have betrayed what they were trying to go for in terms of Kay as a character or the role that she sort of played within that world. But yeah, I think you'll like it. I don't mean that in I said that almost like in a disparaging way. Like, oh no, I think you'll like it.
You noob.
No, I don't mean that at all. I just think that like given like what you were hoping for prior to its release and some of the conversations we had, I think it will tick a lot of those boxes for you. And it is still like, an open world. It's a recreation of some, not necessarily like classic Star Wars elements. Like I'm not speeding around the surface of these planets going, oh my god, that's that landmark.
Right.
That's where he does. It's not that, but there is still something inherently Star Warsy to like going across a road and getting to a crossing and like. It's one of those. I don't know the names of any of the ships, but one of the things that Luke like rides in the
X-wing.
It's kind of like no, the ones that go along the ground. Sorry.
Is it land speeder?
When him and Obi-Wan are like going into town, and it's like their 2-seater thing. It's like when you come up against, and when you have to weave out of the way of one of those when you get into a T junction, like, and you're like, oh, cool, and like, you see some big. I was about to say dinosaur. That would have pissed off Star Wars fans, but you see some big creaturey, monstery thing grazing, and you're like. Oh, it's Star Wars, and I'm on a speeder, and it's like, and I'm speeding up to my ship, and I'm getting in my ship, and I'm, this isn't no shots fired here at Starfield, but I'm taking off, and I'm pointing at the sky, and I'm leaving this planet's atmosphere, and now I'm dogfighting, and, and there's also, again, not to, say, bang a drum that people have heard too many times already elsewhere, but I also think the factions and the reputation thing is kind of neat. A lot of it can be manipulated in the ways that you imagine it could be manipulated, and that might leave it feeling a little bit, I guess, like underwhelming for some people. Like it doesn't have enough of an impact on the way the game plays out. But the first time that you take on a side quest and they're like, "Oh, sneak into this place and steal this thing," and you realize and it's in an area that is controlled by a faction that you're in a good standing with, and you don't have to sneak in. You're like, oh, I'm walking through an area that other people would be sneaking through because of decisions that I've made, and not story decisions, just how I played the game and like who I took contracts with, but there are also story moments where a lot of the story missions I'm on at the moment have a point where like someone comes up to you and says, hey, how'd you feel about double crossing the person who gave you that mission, or how do you feel about giving that to me instead of that person? And you usually get these often quite binary choices between one faction or another. I'm interested to see if those have any character ramifications, though, because one thing I will say, the factions make sense. The bars filling up or shrinking makes sense. NPCs getting angry at you makes sense. But there are story characters from certain factions that, as of yet, haven't really reacted to me, like, fucking them over. Like, I bumped into someone and had a conversation with them and thought to myself, since the last time I spoke to you, I've killed an awful lot of people who are on your team. And the game isn't always equipped to react to that, from what I've seen. But then I will also say, I've only really operated within the poor to good range of my relationship with these factions. I haven't gone, you can get so deep with a faction where they're sending, like, hit squads after you. And I haven't got to that with any of them yet.
That's really interesting, because one of the reviews I saw basically said the faction thing's kind of pointless because it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't make any difference to like your gameplay, which surprised me, because I was like, well, how can it make? What's the point in having it if it makes no difference to gameplay? Then I saw, I think it was SkillUp's review where he was sort of mentioning the fact that actually no, having different standing with different factions actually makes a really big difference to what's going on and where you can go and how you can go there and how you interact with those people. So it's interesting to hear you kind of put those two different counterpoints together, where you're saying like it does make a really big difference when you're just moving around and being in their area and that, but actually the game then fails to carry that through to completion by with the story side of it making it have an effect. Okay.
And we'll see how that plays out. Like it might be more adaptive and responsive to your choices than I know it to be. It might just be because I'm early in the game and I haven't actually made that many big decisions. but there are like quest givers who are part of factions who you need to interact with, and it's like I wonder if they know like that I betrayed them the last time, or that I
Right.
actually didn't do the thing they asked, or like remains to be seen. But I still think that skill up, by the sounds, by what you're saying, describing it to me, is like broadly right, and it just I think everyone's got a different sort of read on whether something is actually significant or not. So, like I think being able to go in and out of certain areas without having to like stealth through them, or being allowed in certain areas, has been quite a big deal so far. Especially when you find completely unrelated side missions that are asking you to, like I said, sneak into someone. You're like, I don't need to sneak in there. It's great. There are other things like some of those areas have vendors in them, so it's like, can you walk up to those vendors and work with those vendors, and also like certain discounts related to the things those vendors are selling based on your relationships. And then of course on the deep end, like I said, if you get to like the lowest of the low rep with any of these factions, they'll send like hit squads after you. So like shit can happen as a result of your choices. They do have an impact, and there's also other little things here and there. Like there are rewards for each like positive gate you pass in terms of your relationship with that faction. So when you go from poor to good to blah 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 blah, and at the start it's like, oh, it's a new skin for your blaster, but by the end it's like, oh, it's a full attire based on that faction, and if you wear all three pieces of that attire, then you get a set bonus, and like that set bonus is kind of tied to the reputation of that faction, where like if they're kind of like a sneaky, shadowy organization, then it might be stealth related. There's one that like has quite a good standing with the Empire, so when you're wearing it, your wanted level reduces faster. Like it's things like that. So there are fun hooks everywhere.
You get in with Jabba the Hutt's crew and then just wearing a slug outfit. She's like walk about.
Jabba's crew, it's got this weird the huts, I think they're called, and it's this weird thing where it's like a splotchy paint aesthetic. It looks like you wore a fairly regular outfit and then went paintballing. That's their aesthetic in the game. I don't know why. I haven't met Jabba yet, but I've met lots of Huttese people, and they speak a weird language, and their faces look like poo.
I do. This is dumb. Already, I'm like, when I play it, I'm not getting in with the huts. I'm going to shoot those fuckers whenever I see them.
I mean, from what I can tell, like you absolutely can do that. Even in such a way where like, I don't know, the huts are a weird one actually, because the huts at the start of the game are the ones who have the best standing in the city or the environment that you first kind of like assimilate yourself with, and for story reasons you're stuck there for a little while before you can go and discover and explore other planets. So you do have to work with them, but you can, I'm pretty sure from memory, you can choose to like not give them,
shoot them in the face,
a bunch of your stuff. No, there's this like boss kind of guy who I stole his ring, or Nick stole his ring, and I still haven't given it back to him. And I broke into one of their bases and stole some records for someone else, and but then I actually end up going and selling it back to him, and it was complicated. You get lots of choices. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I have one more question. Just quickly one. So you kind of alluded to the fact that obviously we were talking about Concord. You sort of alluded to what game are we going to kick this week, kind of thing. You know, who are we gonna dance on the coffin of? You kind of alluding to the fact that maybe Star Wars Outlaws has had a bit of this, in that people have enjoyed giving it a bit of a kick in, maybe undeservedly so. You're only, like you said, you're only 5 hours into this. Is obviously your early impressions. So do you think at the moment you would say you think Star Wars Outlaws has maybe been unfairly categorized as, I suppose like mid is what a lot of people are saying, right?
I think so. Like for my money, I haven't paid that much attention to exactly what people are saying. Like I do know I've seen some YouTube videos and some YouTube thumbnails where that are trying to paint this game as like something of a disaster,
right? And
I really don't think it is that. But do you know what I would say is it reminds me of during the summer when I think it must have been after the Ubisoft Forward, when the release for Star Wars Outlaws was outlined and the various versions that would be sold. were made public, and there was a $130 version that had like an exclusive Jabba the Hutt mission,
Right.
and like lots of people online got really angry about how expensive the most expensive version of Star Wars Outlaws was, and I kind of sat there and said, I don't think people are in the wrong necessarily for getting angry about how. Well, getting angry is probably a bit too far. I don't think people are necessarily in the wrong. It is that's an expensive version of the game, and I wouldn't recommend anyone buy that version of the game. But when you break down what they're actually selling, it's the base game, it's the season pass with 2 promised pieces of story-driven single-player content later down the line, and it's the ultimate pack which has all the cosmetics in it. And it's like that's what almost every game does right now. Like what that's what Assassin's Creed Shadows is like going to do in 2 months' time from the exact same publisher. It just felt weird to me that Star Wars Outlaws was getting like dicked on for something that Ubisoft have done now for a long time, and something that when you break it down, 1, it's not that egregious, and 2, just don't spend the money. And there's an element of that applies to a lot of the reaction, which is like, why have we picked this game to kind of like make the poster boy for, look at this mediocre to bad open world game with an ugly protagonist? I'm like, it's not that. It's just a 7 out of 10 Ubisoft game, like that you're going to like a lot more if you really like Star Wars. I don't know. It just, I don't know. Just a lot of it feels like noise to me, and I don't know what impact, if any, it has on like I'm looking now. Star Wars Outlaws is painfully bad, and it's like a thumbnail with K with a face Photoshop to look even weirder than it is, and a screenshot of a like to dislike ratio, but it doesn't say what video that like to dislike ratio is from, where the dislikes are double the likes.
The question:
some ordinary game of Star Wars Outlaws isn't a good game. 284,000 views. Asmongold with almost 1 million reviews reacting to IGN's review, saying how are they giving it a 7 out of 10, calling the reviews what, like that's. And then another Asmongold video, worst game of the year, Star Wars Outlaws, with another, this time also in the thumbnail, a like to dislike ratio where the dislikes are in this case 3 times as high as the likes. That video has 1 million views. I've also just noticed that video is from 4 months ago. So it's not even about the game. It's about, I'm guessing, 4 months ago, that's May. Had the Ubisoft Forward even happened at that point?
I'm trying to think. I don't think so.
Another Asmongold video 4 days ago, 700,000 views. This game is not 7 out of 10. I presume because his head is in his hands in the thumbnail that he thinks it's less than that. But what I'm saying is like, there's so much of that shit out there now, and I don't know how much that moves the needle for the average consumer. It doesn't move the needle for me, and if you're listening to this, I don't think it should move the needle for you either. It's a flawed game, but I think it's perfectly fine. And if you like what you saw in reviews and then go out and give it a go. I don't know.
I think there are obviously some people out there who will off the back of their favorite YouTuber will not buy a game because the YouTuber says it's bad. I think most people do the sensible thing, which is if you're interested in something, you're already interested in it before you see the video from your favorite YouTuber, but then you go and you consume like 3, 4, 5, 6 different reviews, different takes from each angle, because you know that the reviewers might have different things that you consider good or bad, and that's like I said,
you have a skill up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. Like you know that okay, this person likes this, especially if the reviewer enjoys certain types of games. There are some reviewers I can watch that they'll do a review for a game and go like 8 out of 10, and they'll say, "Oh, what a fantastic game," and I'll play it and be like, "This is a pile of crap. Like I cannot stand this game." So you have to absolutely try and take it all with a pinch of salt. Use all those different reviews to find the elements that you like and don't like, and agree with and don't agree with, and then build your own idea.
And I will also say, like on that note, like Ubisoft pushback and Ubisoft fatigue are not new ideas, and they're not exclusive to Star Wars Outlaws. So if that's what a lot of the the rumblings beneath these kinds of videos are, is that it's just an extension of the same thing that is applied now to every Assassin's Creed since Valhalla, then like, yeah, fair enough. Like I totally get Ubisoft fatigue, but I don't think it makes it as bad as again. I hate to just sit here reading YouTube video titles all day. But Star Wars Outlaws user scores dropped in all caps to 4.2. Ubisoft gets what they deserve as major losses loom. Like, what do you mean? What does that even mean?
See, now you've got me worried that their title of our video, terrible Concord launch, PlayStation goes Scorched Earth. I'm like, are people going to be reading our thing going, they've not gone Scorched Earth, they just took it down. Like, I there is some element of trying, but I'm with you. Like, I think these sorts of headlines and titles are so over the top. Like, we're being playful with the fact that they have gone Scorched Earth, as in they've removed Concord from everywhere. It's getting totally taken off the internet.
That is Scorched Earth.
I think it is to some degree. No, I think it is. I think it is.
With a thumbnail that says Star Whores with the O in Whores replaced with the Ubisoft logo, and a title saying Star Wars Outlaws is a steaming pile of shit. And we're not making 3 minutes 51 second, what I presume are glitch and bug compilations called Star Wars Outlaws Quadruple A Gaming Experience, which I presume is ironic. Star Wars Outlaws is simply sad. Yeah. I don't know. Star Wars Outlaws, another AAA gaming failure incoming, with an arrow pointing to a Metacritic score of 40, which is like it didn't have a Metacritic score of 40. It's in like the 70s, I think. I think
you're right. I think it is more of an idea of.
I'm going to stop now. Sorry.
I think it's more of that. What game? 'Cause we find this week in and week out. There's no news stories. We don't know what to talk about, blah, 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 blah. And then when something does come along, you can't just do a review for a game. I think a lot of these things maybe are taking the fact that this game could have and maybe should have been like a high 80s. Maybe they could have done more with it. There's no reason why they couldn't have put a lot of polish on it. And so what do? You take a mediocre attempt at making an open world Star Wars game, which is, like you said, is completely serviceable, enjoyable, especially if you like Star Wars. And they really go to town on it because there's just nothing else to cover that week.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't like Star Wars, or maybe you like Star Wars so much that you get really annoyed when they put a slightly ugly female protagonist in the lead role. Like, it could be a bunch of these things, I suppose.
Maybe. I guess that would also explain why it almost ends up being like the polar opposite of the voices in the community that were suggesting that Black Myth Wukong should be the game of the year, and that if it's not the game of the year, then there's some broader conspiracy. And you're sat there going like, the reviews kind of were like between the 7s and the 8s. It seems solid, but inspired by other comparable titles, and not like the be all and end all. And people are like, no, it's the game of the year. It's the game.
Like definitive. No, it is the game of the year.
Like, it's like, okay, it's September. Astrobot's not out yet. But
I do love.
Maybe everything has to be behind. I don't know.
I do love it. I bet you love it like I do. Is when someone says, objectively, this is the best game ever, and you go, subjectively, and they're like, no, objectively, and you're like, okay, all right, let's move on.
All I know is that once a week, you and I sit down to talk about games, and I get really excited to do it because I like games and I like you. And then I have to go online and I have to see what people are talking about, and it makes me sad. And that hasn't always been the case. And like I don't know. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like I don't like a lot of what I see out there at the moment when it comes to discussions about the things that I care about, like almost more than anything else in the world, like apart from friends and family and life.
I think there have been some big misses lately. It seems like in the last couple of years, and I do think like maybe the big misses and the things that have seemed to be very off in gaming and should never have happened have maybe fed into the idea that now we're constantly looking for the next big miss. And things that seem like they should be an easy win. Like Ubisoft making an open world Star Wars game seems like it probably should be something they can handle pretty easily and get it like Game of the Year contender. And maybe if they've not quite hit certain things, it's frustrated some people. But I'm kind of with you. Like, I think it's fine to say something's fine and just move on. We don't have to necessarily have everything be amazing. I have one more question before we move on. I really want to know how does this compare to Avatar?
Yeah, I think I've already played it for longer than I played Avatar before I first fell off Avatar, which is, I feel kind of harsh saying that because again, there was nothing wrong with Avatar. Like, Avatar is a reminder to me of again why what's happening to Star Wars Outlaws in terms of some of the things we've been talking about the last couple of minutes are fascinating to me because they're so comparable. They're Ubisoft published, Ubisoft massive developed action open world action adventure games based off massive media franchises, and they're both pretty darn good. They're both pretty darn solid. They're flawed and there are absolutely shortcomings, but if you're invested in those worlds and you've wanted to explore, big broad versions of those landscapes, then it's a dream come true for you. It's what you've been picturing. I'm not going to say your whole life in terms of Avatar, but there might be some people out there, especially in China, where they named mountains after it or whatever the fuck they did, that they're really into that. So the idea to me that like Avatar kind of came and went without so much as a whisper, and Star Wars Outlaws is getting the kind of reception that it is indicative to me of like there's a group of people out there that are waiting for opportunities to jump on. I'm not going to call them bandwagons necessarily, but to jump on games like Star Wars Outlaws and to pitch their tent, get their pitchforks out, and get angry about something, because Lord knows if you're A, online, or B, a gamer, or C, both, then you'll perpetually need something to be angry about. Why else would you be online were it not to be angry?
There you go.
So but play Avatar Frontiers of Pandora when that game gets cheap enough. It's really totally fine. It's really totally fine. I know that's not a screaming endorsement, but like, yeah.
Do you know what I nearly bought today for £5? I think it was £5. Or no, maybe £4, maybe less, maybe like £4.70 or something. And then I was like, it's probably free somewhere, so I'm not going to buy it. Forspoken.
Ah, interesting. I kind of did the same thing. Well, I actually did the same thing. I have a sealed copy of Forspoken.
There you go.
And I'm like, maybe I should play this one day. And then I go, nah.
That one day is not today.
That day is not today. But Forspoken, a game that has kind of had a similar grilling to Star Wars Outlaws, I guess, with hindsight. Even if Star Wars Outlaws appears by most accounts to be a better game. I wouldn't know. I haven't played Forspoken. Do you know one thing I will say about Star Wars Outlaws, Jonesy?
What's that?
Every now and then, while I was playing it, I think it's a good-looking game. I'm playing it on the PS5 for what it's worth. But every now and then, I would look around. I would look at parts of the environment. I would look at the way that the resolution was scaling, or sort of the level of detail of some of the far off parts of the environment when I was looking out over the horizon. And I would think to myself, do you know what? This is one of the first times I've thought to myself, there's a case to be made for a professional version of the console that I'm playing this on. Not because it looks bad, but because I'd love it to look better. And I know that the PC version probably does, and I get a bit jealous. So it's fortuitous then that a PlayStation 5 Professional, or a PS5 Pro, if leakers are to be believed, I don't know, it remains to be seen, could be around the corner. Have you heard about this?
I think I might have heard about this.
Funny that. It's almost like we talked about it before on this podcast. So the latest bit of news, the latest scoop, if you will, comes from noted D-Labs user Bill Kun, who is a name that we have brought up on this podcast before, and I'm sure any of you into your leaks and rumors have heard the name before. Someone who kind of made a bit of a name for themselves by getting the PlayStation Plus Games of the Month correct, like a few days before PlayStation announced it, for months on end. Clearly someone with, it's pretty fair to guess, I'd say, with access to some kind of like retail back end, whether that is the PlayStation Store itself or whether that's something else entirely. They have come forward and spoken a little bit more about the PS5 Pro now that they know a little bit more about it. Firstly, confirming that the new console will indeed be called the PS5 Pro. They're not shying away from the naming convention that they stuck with, or they created, I guess, last generation with the PS4 Pro. Bill Kun also said it will be announced, quote, very soon, with the official announcement set for the first half of September. So the next potentially 2 weeks as we're recording this, which again makes a certain amount of sense if you want this on store shelves in, I'm going to say, November. Sounds about right. They also claim to have access to the PS5 Pro's packaging design. But because obviously it would be suicide to share any copyrighted images, instead what we have, and I recommend anyone curious enough to look this up, is a sketch of the purported PlayStation 5 Pro design. So according to this illustration, which is kind of accurate enough that I have to, if I were guessing, I would say it would almost look like it's been traced more than sketched freehand, because it looks, very believable. Also believable is how similar it is to the existing PS5, and especially the PS5 Slim design, almost identical, still white. The main difference is the addition of 3 black stripes across the middle of the console. I guess, the 3 black stripes maybe being reminiscent of the 3 layers of the PS4 Pro. Something about, the number 3 clearly screams professional to the designers at PlayStation Hardware.
Is the Slim all white? Like there's no black bit in the middle?
The Slim is very similar to that picture you're looking at, yeah, but that bit in the middle is just one thin line, I think. I apologise. I know we're talking. Jonesy and I are looking at an image that you can't see, but
so of the PlayStation 5, you have 2 white faceplates, and then you have the black thing in the middle.
Well, on the Slim, you have a black line in the middle. Yes, not the original.
When you say when you keep saying a line in the middle, like imagine the PlayStation 5 Pro, right? Sorry, not the Pro. It's not what we're talking about. Imagine the PlayStation 5. You take off the faceplates.
Or PlayStation 5 Slim.
PlayStation 5. PlayStation 5.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have the black central piece, which you then attach the white faceplates to. Is the Slim completely white? Does it not have the black chunk in the middle?
I'm simply talking about the faceplates themselves.
Oh, I see. Okay.
On the PlayStation 5 Slim, what they did is they created essentially a black strip that ran across the center of the faceplates. That was also the differentiating line between the digital and non-digital versions of the Slim. So digital, so that you could attach that disk drive, the external disk drive.
I get you.
But anyone who's seen the PS5 Slim and done it side by side with the PS5 will note that rather than just one smooth white face, it has kind of like a black strip across the middle. The PS5 Pro supposedly has 3 black strips.
But is the middle section of the if you take those faceplates away and you just have the lump of plastic in the middle that houses all the computer elements, that bit's still going to be black, is it? That bit is
still going to be black. That
right.
the naked PlayStation 5 Pro will still be black. What it will be though, based again, assuming these sketches or traces are mostly to scale, it will be thicker. But what that means is it being thicker and how far apart the face plates are obviously doesn't change the face plates themselves, which means it will still be compatible with existing PS5 Slim face plates and the existing PS5 external disk drive. So they've basically come up with a way where they said, well, if we make the black part, the fat part, the middle part fatter, and we make the whole console taller, but by creating these additional slits in the middle, then all the existing faceplates will still function. They'll just be in slightly different positions relative to where they are now. They'll be slightly further apart. There'll be more meat between them. I don't know why I'm using words like meat and naked to describe a console. There is something slightly sexual about new hardware to me, but I promise, not my regular vernacular.
So it's kind of what you'd imagine. Like, it's not too dissimilar from what we've already seen. It's a little bit of an adaptation, but there's more meat in there for more gubbins and more goodness on the insides to make it more powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Which is broadly what we expected. That's kind of what happened with the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. In the past, you go back to the PS3, Slim revisions, and PS2, I guess, Slim revisions have sometimes been a little bit more dramatic with their redesigns, but this isn't one of those. This is something that, sits alongside PlayStation 5s on store shelves, and people look at the price tag and go, oh, that's the premium thing. So it's bigger, it's fatter. One thing we don't know, though, is whether or not the PS5 Pro will have a disk drive by default, how many SKUs of the PS5 Pro there'll be, whether there'll be one with, one without. Bill Kuhn has not been able to confirm what's actually going to happen there. All they've been able to confirm is that the version that they saw presumably the box or the art or the marketing that they saw was featured a PS5 Pro that did not have a disc drive. It may well be, given some of the rumors about how expensive this console could be and how ambitious some of the hardware they're packing in there is, it could well be that they have made the executive decision to sell the PS5 Pro without a disc drive as a means of essentially cutting down costs. We know that PlayStation value their external disc drive at, is it around $100, Jonesy? I don't know what it is, GBP.
I don't know.
I think it's around $100. Obviously, it'd be very different in terms of actual manufacturing costs and stuff like that. But in terms of what that communicates to the users, if they're able to knock even $50 to $75 off the RRP of the PS5 Pro when it's already going to be a very expensive console, I can see why they might do that.
Yeah, it looks like you're right, about £100.
Okay. Also worth noting that the report said that the PS5 Pro will come with the same standard white DualSense controller that comes with the original and slim models. So the more that we look at this, Jonesy, the more that we're faced with a console that, seemingly, with 3 to 4 months left of the calendar year, is going to slip out onto the market. Is not going to, if they're going to make a big splash or a big song and dance about it, they're kind of running out of time to do so. Certainly in terms of software that it's going to release alongside, there's not a lot of time left to announce some big major first-party software that it's going to be bundled with or anything like that. So we're kind of looking at just a more expensive, more powerful PS5 that they're going to slip out, put on store shelves, and kind of just let live for the remainder of the generation. Is that at all surprising to you that there's not a little bit more fanfare or excitement around this platform, or that they're not being a little bit more ambitious with their rollout and the release and the software and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it's quite surprising. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm pretty sure with the PlayStation 4 Pro there was a lot of like, this is the definitive way to play this game. We're doing this game's coming out. You're going to get a better version to play this game, and it was all that. Whereas this seems to have none of that. This is just oh yeah, it's coming out. Like, right. I don't know. Maybe they're in a weird place and they thought they'd be in a different spot, and this is ready to go, and some stuff that they were hoping would be available isn't. Maybe it's maybe they know that actually it doesn't matter if you do all of that sort of stuff, and they've got such a good place in the market that if they release it, they know it will sell well. It's really difficult to know. I'm surprised. Like, they've done nothing to make me want to consider getting one. I think I already said in a previous pod that I'm not someone who would rush out and get this just to play the definitive version or the definitive way to play this game. But they could have swayed me probably if they'd had some first party stuff coming out. But then, blimey, we've just talked about some first party stuff coming out, which is so. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's quite surprising. But hey, maybe they'll surprise us, Jamie. Maybe they'll flip it, and when they do announce it, they'll have some other stuff to announce at the same time, and it's going to be the best way to play, blah, 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 whatever you like.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Again, you'd imagine there'll be some kind of, announcement event for this. I don't know if they wheel out Mark Cerny to talk about, systems architecture or anything like that, like they've done in the past. But yeah, at some point they do have to try and make the case for this. But it's very hard to imagine what the case would be to try and appeal to, at least the kind of consumer that you identify yourself as. And like you said, like, the software situation can change very quickly, and Jeff Grubb has already been out there saying he expects a state of play stream before the end of the month. That sounds totally believable. But what you're not going to have in a state of play that happens in September is, an announcement for a Ghost of Tsushima 2 or something like that in time for November. Again, I keep saying November. That's just when I presume this will happen. It could. I don't actually know.
I'm trying to think time frame, like, because what else could be?
You'd have to do future stuff. You'd have to do like, we're announcing like Ghost of Tsushima 2 and a couple. I don't even know what else is like they have ready, because like, again, I don't know how close Naughty Dog are. I don't know how close Sony Santa Monica are. I don't know how close Bend are. Like, I don't know how close Blue is it Blue Point or Blue Hole? I always get them mixed up. I don't know how close some of these studios are, and I don't. And if they are close enough, where you can come out in the next month and say these games aren't going to be ready for launch, but look how good Ghost of Tsushima 2 is going to look in April of next year on the PS5 Pro. Then that helps a little bit, but it is still a little bit odd as well because people are going to pick up this console in November. And the other thing is though is I don't really know what the name of the game is for half-step consoles like this. Is the name of the game to make a big splash out the gates and sell as many units as possible, or is it to make sure that, let's say the ratio is similar to the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, to have it so that 20% roughly of people who buy a PlayStation 5 between now and the end of the generation buy the more expensive one, and that actually over the passage of time makes it financially viable. Maybe it is that, in which case it doesn't really matter what it launches with. It's just about the 20% of people who go to buy a PS5 between now and the end of the generation. And let me tell you something, Jonesy, at some point next year, a lot of people are going to be buying PS5s. And if 20% of them buy the $600 PS5 Pro, that's good money.
Yeah.
I'm talking about GTA, basically. Sorry.
No, yeah. No, I think you're right. And it's interesting. I think the point you make is a good one, is that if it's more a case of, rather than buy this right now because you need it to play this, if it's more of a, you want to have this in your hands ready to go because these games are going to be available, and maybe it's also a thing they don't want people to rush out and buy them because then they had issues with supply line and everything with the launch of the PlayStation 5. So maybe a slower, more drip fed, slower take up is better for them. And actually, and maybe then we do start to see things like GTA. We start to see more from like Wolverine, and
Wolverine, I forgot about Wolverine.
And some of those titles are ones. Death Stranding 2, Ghost of Tsushima 2, as you said, and we start to, and then it's almost like then it becomes a thing in your own head, is that those games are coming out like next year after, and start to say to yourself, well, hold on, do I want to get a PlayStation 5 and play the less good version of Wolverine and Death Stranding 2 and Ghost of Tsushima 2? Exactly.
I don't like knowing I'm playing the inferior version.
I tell you what will be a bit of a kicker is if they come out and, for example, and this I imagine would actually move the needle. If Insomniac show off Wolverine, it looks incredible, and then they say this is running at 1440p, 30 frames a second cinematic, 1080p in performance mode, running at 60p with DLSS, and then they say, but here it's running in 4K, 60 fps, locked 60 fps, and it's pure quality and performance. Everything's just working and beautiful, and that is the PlayStation 5 Pro. That will make a lot of people go, whoa, I've got to have that one. Like, that will make a big difference.
For what it's worth, I don't think they'll get there. I don't think that the console they put out is like a 4K 60 machine. I know, which is stupid to say because
I think that you're right. It was. Yeah,
I just think that we're constantly
8K.
Like, but it's a constant like chicken and egg, which is that like we release a piece of hardware that's capable of resolutions and frame rates that are at the level that we expect them to be, and then we start making games that are never ever going to do. And it's like, well, of course it's not going to run at 4K 60 if we make a game that looks like that. Yeah, exactly. Well, and so it's a tricky one. But I'd love it. I'd love that to be the selling point. And you're right. Like, maybe a drip feed sale approach is what's best for them. We just had Black Myth Wukong come out, and PS5s were selling out in parts of China. There were even reports at certain points that PS5s were selling out in parts of Japan because that was the next best place to get PS5s from when you're based in China.
Right.
Like, and I'm because I'm a nerd and I have way too much spare time. I was running the numbers the other day, and I was looking at GTA 5, and it's impossible to say at this stage how GTA 6 will sell compared to GTA 5. And GTA 5 was also a very unique beast because it launched in September of 2013, just prior to the launch of the PS4 and Xbox One. So it hit perfect mass market saturation on the PS3 and the 360. A year later, it then re-released on those then next-gen consoles, and so it was a unique beast in terms of how well positioned it was to sell across various platforms and various generations. But if you say to yourself, for the sake of argument and ignoring lots of caveats, GTA 5 launched in fall of 2013, and go all the way up to the fall of 2020 when the PS5 and the Series X came out, and say, well, what did it sell in that 7 years that essentially marked its first quote-unquote generation on the market? Essentially, not actually, but essentially. What did it sell? And I couldn't find the exact number, but if you imagine it somewhere between where it was at in 2018 and where it was at in 2021, it would have been about 125 million copies sold across the generation. There aren't 125 million combined sold PS5s and Xbox Series X's out there. So even like if over the course of a generation, the demand for GTA 6 is comparable to the demand for GTA 5, tens of millions of people need to buy quote unquote next gen consoles inside the next however many years,
right?
3 or 4 years. Most of them,
20% of them.
More like 70% of 20% of them will choose to buy a PlayStation 5, and 20% of those people will choose to buy a PS5 Pro. That probably covers Sony. Maybe not all the way, because of R&D is expensive, manufacturing is expensive, but also I think this console will be expensive. I think we're looking at like a $600 console personally, without a disc drive. So
yeah, and then, so yeah, 700 including, which is like I get it. I get like inflation. I get all of that, and the fact that things have to go up, and things have gone up a lot in the last few years. You're starting to get to a ludicrous amount of money. Like as soon as we hit like £1,000 for a console, I'm starting to think I'm a PC gamer again.
I mean, that is the wall that these manufacturers will start to butt heads against, right? Is that as soon as you get into graphics card prices,
yeah,
it starts to be harder to recommend consoles. Yeah, we'll see. Do you know what? Something tells me it's going to be a very interesting September. Do you know what? I can't wait. I love this shit. This is the shit that I know I just was doom and gloom about certain parts or corners of the games industry like 10 minutes ago, but this kind of stuff, the new hardware, new features, all that kind of shit, that's what I live for. That's what gets my dick hard.
Steph's giving me grief in chat. He's saying should be a PC gamer, full stop. Don't mess around with these silly consoles. I don't agree, Steph.
Consoles, yeah.
I don't agree. I like a console. I like a PC too, but I like a console.
Steph, come back to us the second that the latest graphics cards don't cost 2 to 3 times more than the latest home consoles.
Yeah, and the rest. To be fair,
yeah.
I kept seeing people saying, Black Myth Wukong with ray tracing, but playing on a 4090. I'm like 4090. And if you look at the prices now, it's like £2,000 for a 4090 still. It's absolutely crazy.
Exactly. I'd also just invite anyone in the chat or anyone listening, even Steph, anyone with a 40 series graphics card. Actually, I'll open it up. Anyone with a 30 series graphics card, a 20 series graphics card, anything like that. If you could come back to the podcast this time next week and let us know your first impressions of Astrobot, that would be great. In the meantime, we move on to the final story of the podcast. And it's a nice one, Jonesy. We're rounding it out with, hopefully, I think some good news all around.
Yeah.
And that is the news that Annapurna, the parent company, as it were, of Annapurna Interactive, is co-financing Control 2, and in return will bring Remedy IP, including Alan Wake and Control, to film and TV in the future. So anyone that doesn't know, you might have heard of Annapurna Interactive, publisher of some critically acclaimed independent titles over recent years. They obviously have a parent company, Annapurna, and there's Annapurna, film companies and TV companies and stuff like that. It's that side of the business, so nothing to do with Annapurna's gaming contributions. They will be contributing financially to the development of Control 2, which is, I believe, underway at the moment. And as I said, in return, they'll be bringing Remedy IP, including Control and Alan Wake, to film and TV and beyond. I don't know what beyond means. I can only mean that's kind of like a Shrek 4D kind of thing. Where when Alan Wake farts, you get a spurt of like air in your face.
I don't want that. Does anyone want that? No, thanks.
You don't want Alan Wake 4D and being able to actually smell Alan?
No, I don't want to smell that. He looks like he doesn't smell good.
That suit doesn't look like it's been dry cleaned in like many, many years. I think I will agree with you on that. I've got a quote here from the Remedy Communications Director, Thomas Puha. I don't know if it's pronounced like that, but I like the idea of him having the word poo in his name, so I'm going to do a little Puha. He said, above all, it means Remedy is able to make Control 2 exactly the game we want it to be, while we now also have an incredible partner to extend our IPs to other mediums. And they've also clarified that Remedy will still be publishing Control 2 itself. You know, like we said, Annapurna do have a game publishing arm in Annapurna Interactive. No involvement whatsoever. So for Remedy, I guess, Jonesy, to a certain extent, it is kind of win-win. Like, we talk so much about acquisition, and especially you go back to 2 years or so when acquisition was all anyone was talking about, and all of a sudden companies like Remedy and IO Interactive and look like sitting ducks waiting for a Microsoft or a Sony to come along and swoop them up. Now I guess in this post-acquisition world, deals like this are kind of like the next best thing, where you've got a new partner, you've got financial support for the development of the game as you want to make it, but also you do directly benefit from the possibility that those IPs end up coming to film and TV in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's obviously a lot of cross sort of pollination between film, TV, games, especially when you look at something like Control, when you look at Alan Wake, that sort of the mythos and the world building and the character building and the different ways you can take it, and the work they've already done and the goodwill they've got with fans. And I think it's kind of a no-brainer that someone wants to take that and turn it to TV into film, which they've already kind of done themselves, Remedy, to some degree inside of the games. To even allude to, like, this is what it could be like, and this is what the world's like, makes complete sense for someone to want to license the IP. And it's what we said before the pod. It sounds like a bit of a weird deal, because it's like Annapurna are paying Remedy to make some of Control 2, so they're helping the production of Control 2. But if you think of it more in the sense of Annapurna have paid to license the IP, and Remedy are using that money to make some of Control 2. It's kind of the same thing as we've heard, a lot of different other deals happen before. And I think that's great. I'm a big fan of Control. I like Alan Wake. I think those worlds, those characters and the stories and everything sound like they should already be on TV. If you think about the sort and in film as well, like, the sort of stories they've got and the weird and wacky, almost it makes me think of like Twin Peaksy, sort of, maybe not quite that weird, but that kind of thing.
I think that's a fitting comparison.
Hopefully better than the third series of Twin Peaks, whatever it was when it came back.
Third series, The Return, and you are the only person on the planet who didn't like it.
I loved series 1 and 2, and then whatever 2 was, and then 3 was just, I didn't even get what was going on. Anyway,
that's why you didn't like it.
That was why I didn't like it. Anyway, maybe I'll give it another try one day. But yeah, no, this completely makes sense to me, and I think it sounds wicked. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Remedy are always one of those companies where I think when they last came up on the podcast, and there was some kind of news around. Usually it's when they update the public on their slate and which games are going in and out of production. I think they mentioned that Alan Wake 2 was close to turning a profit or something like that, or was just about to be profitable. And you were kind of sat there going, like, man, that game came out almost a year ago. You really wanted Remedy to come out and say, Alan Wake 2 has been wildly successful. We were in profit from week 2, and everything else has been the cherry on top. But like, the reality is that Control and Alan Wake, despite their critical acclaim and the fact that you meet a lot of people who are very passionate about them, I think they remain, commercially speaking, slightly like middling successes. Successes all the same, but like not games that set the world on fire. And I don't think that's going to change. And so the idea that there's like another player involved who can ensure from a budgetary perspective that they continue to match their lofty ambitions. Because, you look at Alan Wake 2, how visually compelling that title was, how strong it was from a technological perspective, some of the more ambitious ideas around its presentation and the implementation of live action. Like, you want to make sure that Remedy continue to have the money to do their shit. That's what I think the real win of this is. It's also worth noting, I was just checking then to remind myself, but Annapurna Pictures, the film arm of Annapurna, have a pretty solid track record when it comes to the quality of their output. They've slowed down a little bit, seemingly, since lockdown, but when you go back to, for example, 2013 alone, Her, American Hustle, and The Grandmaster had a combined 17 Academy Award nominations.
Wow.
I'm also seeing things here like The Master, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, Foxcatcher, Vice, Zero Dark 30, American Hustle, all the way through to the animated adult comedy film Sausage Party. There are a number of very good films here. If Bill Street Could Talk, Phantom Thread. I mentioned Spring Breakers. Do you know what? Killing Them Softly. I liked Killing Them Softly. Why not? Brad Pitt, good Brad Pitt film. There are some hits there, and do you know what? I'd love it if we got like an Oscar-worthy Control or Alan Wake film. That would be like the best possible outcome for something like this.
It's also for them. It's got to be a win-win in the sense of you're getting paid for someone to use your IP to make something, but actually, as you said, they need it to be more of a commercial success, and it could have ended up being, free advertising for them if Annapurna do go and make TV, film, and beyond. That opens it up to a wider audience, and then people who maybe wouldn't have played these games say, "Oh, I want to go back. I want to play Alan Wake. I want to play Alan Wake 2. I want to play Control 2. I want to play all these games," and then they start to get more money out of it, and it's hopefully one will feed the other. And it will go round and round, and then we'll all be very happy and very excited.
Exactly. I do have something to ask you though. Obviously, over the years, Remedy have used a lot of as in the case of most companies nowadays, use a lot of real actors who have acted across film and TV in their games. When you look at something like Alan Wake 2, where obviously David Harewood showed up as Mr. Door, and they still have Sean Ashmore popping up in there as they did in Quantum Break. And in Quantum Break, they obviously had the whole live action thing that was full of people who had been in, everything from Game of Thrones to The Wire and all sorts. But this is Hollywood we're talking about, and sometimes you need a leading man. We saw that firsthand with, ironically, I don't think Remedy were really involved in any way whatsoever, but when Max Payne did come to big screens, someone said, "Look, Sam Lake, your face is great. Mark Wahlberg's is better."
That film was so crap as well.
It was horrible, but it should be noted that they would have, I guess, an excuse, for want of a better way of putting it, with Alan Wake, because Alan Wake is famously voiced and faced, or voiced and appearanced by different people. Alan Wake looks like Il Cavilli when you see him, and when it's live action and stuff like that. But Matthew Peretta does the voice of Alan, so they would have an excuse to hire someone from Hollywood's big leagues to don the suit and to put the Duracells in the torch of one Mr. Wake. Who are you casting, Jonesy? Who's your you knew that was where that question was going.
My brain immediately went to one place, and I'm like, and I don't know why, and I think it is because of the suit, the hair, and everything, and it immediately went Keanu Reeves, which, but he has been.
I don't know if I like that.
He's been pretty ubiquitous lately in game related media. Obviously, his Cyberpunk, and also Sonic 3,
and he's lent his likeness to the Armored Core short that's going to appear in the Amazon Prime TV show that we talked about last week that was revealed at ONL. So
I think he is a little too all over it. So okay, that is tough.
Yeah.
Alan Wake.
Do you know the other reason it's tough is because Alan Wake is amongst some corners of the community and the fan base, he's actually a bit of a joke, because he's actually a bad writer when you look at the shit he actually writes, and he's very kind of cheesy and like almost just like a knockoff Stephen King, and he's also perpetually nervous. So you can't have anyone that's too commanding because Alan Wake spends the entire game going, "What am I doing? Why am I here? How do I get out of it?" Like it's that kind of vibe.
I think I know.
Okay.
I'm looking at him right now, the pictures from the game right now, and I think I've got it, and I think it covers all those elements you've just said.
Okay.
Jared Leto.
No, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't even hate on Jared Leto the same way some people do online. Like, I think he's a very good actor who has had some great roles and been in some amazing movies. Some of my favorite movies. Requiem for a Dream. But I just can't see him as Alan Wake. I just can't picture that face.
Two things.
I'm trying to Photoshop it in my brain right now.
Let it grow on you, for one.
Okay.
And also, remember that I've played half of Alan Wake 1, and that's a while ago. So maybe I'm not the best person to say. Jose A in chat has said Troy Baker. Which is a good shout. But is that too on the nose?
It'd be a bit of a weird one. It would be fascinating if Troy Baker's big like Hollywood crossover came in a video game adaptation of a character that he hadn't voiced.
Because he's not he's a little unimpressive to look at.
But Alan Wake is unimpressive.
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. So he kind of fits the bill. Like I'm trying to think about the last thing I saw him in was Last of Us. Troy Baker, like acting. I don't think I've seen him in many other things. And so yeah, maybe Troy Baker would be a good shout.
I don't know. I think it would be distracting for me, but that's maybe we're in a slightly unique position where I think I even hear Troy Baker's voice in any context. I'm like, well, that's Troy Baker. What's he doing here?
That's true. I'm sticking with Jared Leto.
I've pulled up a list of actors with a beard. This is according to Google. I will also say, although I'm going to skim them out, most of these actors don't have beards. But I'm going to throw some names at you. Okay. Bradley Cooper.
No, too chiseled.
John Krasinski.
Do you know what's funny? I thought John Krasinski when you said it. But,
interesting.
And I don't know why. I think one of the problems with John Krasinski is he's a big dude, right? He has quite physical.
He seems like it, yeah.
And I think that whilst obviously he doesn't necessarily come across as that, I think if he doesn't want to be this a little bit of a joke, a little bit like not that imposing, maybe he kind of looks a little wrong, a little too big, a little too. It's tricky, but maybe not John Krasinski. But he is very good.
One that I'm actually convincing myself of the more I think about it, although you would have to deal with some bullshit from some annoying people online, Dev Patel. Because he kind of, when you look at him, he kind of looks, he doesn't not look like Alan Wake. And I think he can kind of pull off that sort of, that nervous demeanor, but with something sort of hidden beneath.
I don't have any attachment to the character that much, but I do come down on the side of like, if you're looking for a kind of disheveled guy who's supposed to be a writer, and we have all these images of him as a limp-haired white guy with black hair, to then say we're going to put Dev Patel in, does to me sometimes say, I wouldn't care necessarily, but I think if then people said, why have you race switched him from one media to another when we are in America and the vast majority of people are white, limp-haired people? Like, I'd be like, yeah.
Does sometimes have like long limp hair, and he does have that same bit.
He's a great actor.
He's literally just made him brown, and there are lots, and like I don't think.
That's fair.
Get that angry about him?
I think. Oh yeah, some people would. I sometimes I'm like, okay, fair enough. I don't have an attachment to that. Do you know what I always go to? As a kid, I absolutely loved Aladdin. If they made an Aladdin film and they made him white, I'd be annoyed.
Sure, yeah.
And so I have to do that same movement in my head.
Especially, given the setting and the time period,
yes.
It would be extremely odd for Aladdin to be white. It wouldn't be that odd for a US-based author to not be white.
No, I don't mean the character and the background. I'm saying if you have a character image in your head and it's been there for a long time, some people would get annoyed with it. And I wouldn't personally. I wouldn't care, but I'm like, then I know some people are going to get annoyed with it. So is it worth it? Based on the fact that there's going to be a backlash. But then at the same time, do you know what? I do have the opposite thing in that I've seen adaptations of things where they completely recast everyone and they're nothing like what they look like in your head and what you've seen before, and they're incredible. And so I'm like, is it time to maybe say, let's completely mix this thing the hell on up? I'm thinking about some of those amazing iterations of like Macbeth and stuff like that, where they've completely changed everything. So
Denzel Washington played Macbeth a couple of years ago.
And I bet he absolutely smashed it. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I just can't see Dev Patel necessarily.
Maybe not. Do you know what it is? I think I was just looking at a lot of this list, and there's a lot of really boring white guys here. And do you know
that's because that's what Alan Wake's supposed to be, isn't he?
Alan Wake is boring, but not in the way that some of these people. What it was when I got to Kit Harington, and I was like, you know what? If you told me the final two in the casting of Alan Wake were Kit Harington and Dev Patel, and you gave it to Kit Harington because he was white, I think I'd be angry.
I'd rather watch Dev Patel than I would watch Kit Harington.
Yeah, like all due respect to
that
Kit
sounds
Harington,
mean.
That would bum me out.
But then that's the caliber of actor.
Jamie Dornan is Alan Wake. It's like, really?
Oh, see, I think he'd be a pretty good Alan Wake, Jamie Dornan.
To be fair, I don't know much about Jamie Dornan's acting other than 50 Shades of Grey.
I see he was in. He was a serial killer in a TV show. I can't remember what it's called. And that was very good. He was a very good twisted sort of deviant serial killer, which I quite liked.
Okay. I should look that up.
Oh, I'm trying to think of anyone else. I can't get past Jared Leto now. I'm like, Jared Leto should be.
There aren't many other names here that inspire. Like there are some that would be really interesting off the wall castings that I'd be fascinated to see what they do with it. Like Paul Rudd is on this list, and I think Paul Rudd would be like a fascinating Alan Wake, but maybe for all the wrong reasons. But at the same time, for some of the right reasons also sprinkled in. So Joaquin Phoenix, like he's a nut job, but at the same time, I bet he'd be a really interesting Alan Wake.
Is he not far too old?
He probably is, but I don't know. I think all you'd have to do is dye his beard. Like, Alan Wake's not. Well,
I find it. I'm a bit of rubbish when it comes to. I find it hard to see other actors who are too far removed from the original source and be like, yeah, they're good. It makes, but then and maybe I'm there with Jared Leto. How old is he? He's got to be getting on a bit. Actually, I'm trying to think. I'm thinking
he must be.
I'm thinking 30 Seconds to Mars era Jared Leto, but obviously that's quite a while ago now.
He's 52 now.
You see, he's getting on a bit as well. I've got a couple of suggestions coming in from chat. Nikki Kidman could be Jessie.
I'm gonna have to look up Nikki Kidman.
Is that Nicole Kidman?
Oh, Nicole Kidman. If that's Nicole Kidman, then that's a.
John Meehan, are you being very, very? What's the word? Like, I don't know. In cahoots with Nicole Kidman, you call her Nikki.
I was like, it's like there's Nicole Kidman's agent in the chat. I was like earnestly typing in Nikki Kidman.
Maybe there is. Maybe there is a Nikki Kidman.
When I think about Jesse Faden, I don't think about a 60-year-old Australian blonde woman. Maybe that's just me.
Jake Gyllenhaal for Alan Wake.
You know what? I bet he'd do quite an annoyingly good job as well.
He's very good.
Yeah. I was trying to see if I could find one of those. You know, people can make like IMDb lists. There are some discussions about it on
Cumberbatch as Alan Wake.
Cumberbatch. Oh,
I can't see that.
I can't picture it. I think he'd probably do a reasonably good job, but I can't picture it.
So 69 DJ just reminded me that Jared Leto was in Morbius, and actually maybe he shouldn't be allowed to do anything.
Maybe.
But then, do you know what though? You take how he looked in Morbius. He looks pretty good for Alan Wake. And that's probably mostly the director.
It's not what I see in Alan Wake. I'm trying to find inspiration online, and like a lot of people are doing this like snarky thing where they're like, the only person who should play Alan Wake is Il Cavilli, and it's like I know that that's him. I know that is Alan Wake, but it's like he's Finnish and he doesn't even voice him himself. Like I don't think you can cast Il Cavilli as Alan Wake in a.
All right.
I know that. Yeah, I don't know.
I've got one for you. Who is your DEI Alan Wake hire? So not who's no, we've got to make this. We've got to get a less attractive, like more everyman actor, not someone who's sort of slim with dark black hair. Like, who are you going for?
I see. I was going DEI to the extreme, and I was going to say
female.
Leslie Jones. I was going to say Leslie Jones from Ghostbusters.
That's too far. That's like like.
What are you trying to say that we can't have a black female Alan Wake, Jonesy? That's not very DEI of you.
I don't think we can. Not yet. You have to give it 5 years. We have to have had a TV show and a film, and then we can flip it, and then Leslie Jones can be Alan Wake.
Right, when we reboot it. When you say DEI, then sorry, what do you mean? Like,
so less attractive, not as slim, not as tall, more everyman. Who's the actors don't really fall into that category.
If he wasn't so, like, again, physically quite big, like I don't mind David Harbour as a bit of like as someone with a bit of an everyman vibe.
David Harbour.
Yeah, you know him from he was Hellboy and he was in Stranger Things.
Oh, I like him. Yeah, he's good. He's good.
Like,
there's another David you made me think of right then.
I feel like when you say that, when you describe an actor as an everyman, then it feels like a backhanded way of calling them unattractive. And I also want to say that I don't think that's the case. Nick Offerman is Alan Wake.
Okay, so we've got a couple more suggestions in chat. So Paul Rudd, which we obviously said about. John Malkovich. Bit old now.
Okay.
Brian Blessed.
I'm saying yes to Brian Blessed and John Malkovich just on the basis I just want to see what happens.
I've got it though. I've got the DEI hire for Alan Wake. David Cross.
Okay. Oh my god! Like in a wig and stuff.
Yep.
David Cross. He has a beard most of the time now. Anyway, David Cross and just doing the David Cross shtick, like talking the way that he talks, and like, okay,
doesn't even try and do anything different. Just as David Cross.
Sure, I'm down. Yeah.
Also in chat, I've also had Kevin Hart should be Alan Wake. If he can be Roland in Borderlands, then he can be Alan Wake.
Why not? Yeah, exactly. Let's blow the shit wide open. I don't see why not. There was someone that I had in my head just then, and I've lost it. It's not been that good then. I think there's a lot of directions you could take this. And when in doubt, if none of this works out, if you screen test all of these guys, just go with a safe pair of hands. Bring in Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt can do it. Chris Pratt can do anything. Oh, hold on.
You know what?
Is it chubby Chris Pratt or is it skinny Chris Pratt? Which Chris Pratt is it?
It's chubby Chris Pratt.
So Parks and Rec Chris Pratt.
It's chubby Chris Pratt because it's Chris Pratt voicing Alan Wake, and they do bring in Ilkavilli to be the model. So they're like, if he's good enough to be the voice of Mario and Garfield, he's good enough for us.
I like it.
Yeah, I've also one more name that actually didn't come up, and he never really has a beard as big as Alan Wake does. But if assuming he can grow one, I think it would work. I think Colin Farrell could be a really interesting, edgy. You don't like Colin Farrell as much as I do, but no. I really like Colin Farrell.
Most people really like Colin Farrell. He is a very good actor. Yeah, no, I could actually imagine him being Alan Wake. I think he'd do a pretty good job. The last one from chat I'm going to pick out is a good, and everyone in chat has got the same problem I've got. So Jose A said Steve Buscemi.
Okay,
but they're doing what I'm doing, which is in your mind you see the actor as they were in the film you're thinking of when it came out. So I'm imagining Steve Buscemi from Con Air, which came out in the 90s, I believe. So this is that's like 30 years ago. So
the other problem I'm having is that, like, with Steve Buscemi and David Cross and Brian Blessed, they're all also actors who you hear before you see.
Right.
Like, the name pops into your head and all you can hear is their voice. And so you say Steve Buscemi, and I've just got a whining, like, nasal voice in my head. And I'm like, that's not like Alan Wake monologues and narrates a lot. You don't want Steve Buscemi doing that.
No, you don't. You don't.
Well,
I couldn't even. I had a look at Jesse. I was reminding myself what Jesse looks like, and I couldn't think of anyone. The only one I thought immediately jumped to mind was like Rachel McAdams, maybe for Jesse. I thought maybe she'd be a good Jesse.
Does Jesse Faden technically have red hair?
Oh, is she? I think she looks like she's got reddish. I don't know if she's technically got red hair, but actually, in some.
I feel like we're between generations when it comes to redheaded actresses, where like the Julianne Moores and Amy Adamses of the world are just, with all due respect to them, looking great, but just aging themselves out of a Jessie Faden kind of window.
I know who should be Jessie Faden, and she needs a job because I've not seen her in anything for a long time. It's what is her name? Emma Watson.
Emma Watson from Harry Potter.
Yes.
No, I don't like that. To be fair, Jessie Faden could just be played by the person who plays Jessie Faden, because again, it is her face, body, voice, performance.
Nah.
And she has done other stuff before. She has done movies and TV. She's currently on TV in The Young and the Restless.
But we're trying to find A-listers to push this series. We can't just have random Emma Stone.
Emma Stone, yeah.
Maybe. I'm trying to be inspired, and I'm not really feeling anything.
Kate Mara. I feel like I haven't seen her in anything since Van Forstic.
Maybe. I do quite like Kate Mara. Oh, that bit in House of Cards.
Molly Ringwald.
Catherine O'Hara. If we're going to go that level.
Okay. Yeah. These are yeah. I don't know if I have any more for that. Florence Welch, from Florence and the Machine.
You're just now picking out redheads. They can wear
that's exactly what I'm doing.
They can wear a wig or dye it. Or what about Florence Pugh with a redhead wig?
I could see it. She's she's very mainstream right now, but I don't think that's I could see it. I feel like she's a little bit shorter than Jessie Faden, but again, that's nothing that can't fix in post. Dozy, please don't go when we're talking about
shots. Shots fired. In chat, is Emma Watson an A-lister? Ouch.
I mean, do you know what? I was about to say almost an autopilot there, that I think being in a series as big as Harry Potter makes you an A-lister indefinitely. But you're right, like Emma Watson and especially Rupert Grint are really like testing the limits of how relevant you have to remain to be an A-lister. I know Rupert Grint didn't necessarily want that smoke. Didn't he buy an ice cream van and like disappear for a few years or something like that?
I know he was in that weird TV show where he pretends he's got cancer, but he like some
God,
I can't remember. It's a comedy. It's basically where he leaves his job and someone somehow thinks he's got cancer, and then I think it's called like the Big C maybe or something, and then he just has to go with it because he's so embarrassed that he can't say I don't have cancer, so he just goes with it. But it wasn't Emma Watson was in not Cinderella. She was in one of the Beauty and the Beast.
Oh yeah, that was a huge hit there as well.
So I think she's hanging on to the A-list moniker. She does a lot of UN type stuff, doesn't she? As well, she does a lot of talks.
Probably
pops up.
Sounds like the kind of thing she do. I think people of a certain generation are not forgetting who Emma Watson is in a hurry, and even if they don't immediately connect the name, all you have to say is the word Hermione, and they'll go, "Oh yeah."
But you'd already nailed it. I completely missed it. It's Rupert Grint. He's got red hair. He could be Jessie Faden.
Rupert Grint as Jessie Faden. I mean, he's been looking for a comeback. I would be looking for a comeback too if I had peaked with the 2002 hit Thunderpants about a guy that can fart on demand.
Who suggested it? Kristen Ritter. Someone suggested. I can't see who it is. Someone suggested Kristen Ritter in chat.
Kristen Ritter's the girlfriend in Breaking Bad. She's the druggy girlfriend in Breaking Bad, and she was in one of the Netflix Marvel shows. I'm
looking at her at the moment. Like I have no idea. She looks like a weird.
Did you not watch Breaking Bad?
I tried. I didn't really like it.
And she was Jessica Jones.
Marvel's
Jessica Jones for a few years. Maybe. I don't know. Big forehead. But again, fix it in post.
There's a thing about the big forehead thing, though, isn't there? There's a lot of actors female actors, especially, they've got a big old forehead who seem to get away with it. So you do what they. I rewatched Battleship recently, which I don't think is that bad a movie. I'm going to put it out there. And they constantly put Rihanna in like hats, bandanas, like things tied around her head because she's just got a bit. She's got a bit of a forehead on her, which is fine. Like it's fine. Very attractive woman. She doesn't need a hat in every scene, and a different hat at that, just to cover it up. You might imagine there's an uncomfortable point in the production meetings where they're like, "Can we get a hat in here?" And then she's like, "Why do we need a hat?" And they're like,
do you communicate that with the person, or do you just try and subtly dress them in ways that obscure their big forehead?
In every scene, no one else is wearing a hat except you, and then you go,
right.
Why am I always in the hat? And every time, and you take it off in one shot, and the director's like, "Can we please put the hat back on Rihanna?" And she's like, "What's going on?"
I feel like she must have. Hopefully, she gave a seal of approval on that one. I also just got caught off guard because, again, always in researching mode, I decided to type into Google actors with a big forehead. And it did come up with a list of actors, but it also listed their heights for whatever reason.
I love this. I'm obsessed with celeb heights.
Oh, well, it's great to have it all in front of me, but I did have a moment where I didn't realize it was listing their heights, and I thought that Google had somehow got onto either the actual or presumed measurements of people's foreheads and was listing that instead. And I was like, how do they know how big Christian Slater's forehead is? When it is just the fact that he is 174 centimeters tall.
But then if you know that, and you have a picture of him head to toe, you could then work out how tall his forehead is, couldn't you?
You could actually, yeah. If you had... Well, yeah, if you had him, and I guess there'd be a few other things you'd have to watch out for perspective. It'd be good to get maybe at least one other thing in the frame for scale. But otherwise, yeah, I think we could. Maybe that's a thing we do in the future. Where maybe we make a little website or a little side hustle where we
celebforeheads.com.
Yeah, to within 1 centimeter of each way. These are our proposed. Best guesses for celeb forehead measurements.
We go the whole hog, mate. We're going to use AI to analyze, and we're going to get it to within 5 microns of how big these foreheads are. And we'll have different categories. We'll have 2 heads, 3 heads, 4 heads, and 5 heads, and 6 heads, and then we'll put them in. And of course, if people don't know, the way you can tell is if you can go from eyebrow to hairline. If you fit 4 fingers, that is a forehead. So look, I'm demonstrating right now, forehead. If you can fit 5 piggies above your eyebrows, you are a 5 head. So everyone now rush off to a mirror, check how many piggies you can fit in between your eyebrows and your hairline.
By the way, while people are doing that, you know how you suggested that we utilize AI as some component of our forehead measuring website. I did decide to ask ChatGPT how big Rihanna's forehead is. And according to ChatGPT, while Rihanna's forehead has been a topic of playful discussion and memes online, often exaggerated for humor, it's important to recognize that her forehead is within the normal range of human proportions. On average, her forehead is about 2.5 to 3 inches tall, measured from the eyebrows to the hairline, as you just wonderfully demonstrated. For someone like Rihanna, who often wears her hair pulled back, her forehead might appear more prominent, but in reality, it's just a normal part of her unique and beautiful facial structure. I'm calling bullshit. I'm going to say, I think...
She also doesn't have her hair pulled back. She wears a fringe to hide it.
How big is it? I said, I think you're wrong. It is big. How big is it? And they said, if we're being more precise, the average forehead height is about 2 to 2.8 inches for men. Rihanna's forehead, while sometimes highlighted jokes, is likely just a bit above average. They're really not. I tell you what, Rihanna's fucking team are pumping big money into ChatGPT, into big AI, because it is defending her to the death here. It is convinced she has an average-sized forehead. Anyway.
We've had some great info in chat that Seebing said that after being in the US Navy, that you couldn't watch Battleship because there were so many things you couldn't ignore. I always find that really interesting when you watch a movie with someone who knows an industry or an area or a field, because you can then say to them like, "Is this real? Is this accurate? Does this happen? Does this happen?" And then they can be like, "No, it's all absolute load of rubbish." That's why I used to watch films where there are like that are set in planes, in like, you know, they're like a Red Eye, or the one where Jodie Foster's kid goes missing, Con Air, stuff like that. Flight Plan, because I'll watch it with my dad, who's a pilot and a commercial pilot, and my dad will be like tutting away saying that's ridiculous, and you know, all this stuff. It's super interesting. But
have you ever watched the Denzel Washington one with him where he gets drunk and like lands a plane upside down?
No.
Or was it just called Flight? Do you not watch that film? That was a good Denzel Washington film.
No, he landed it upside down.
It was just called Flight. I don't think he actually lands a plane upside down, but he basically miraculously crash lands a plane after a mechanical failure, but he's also a drunk.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah.
But there is a good question here. What if you don't have a hairline? That is a great question.
Because it's just an infinite-sized forehead.
No, because obviously that would then be like the back of your head would be part of your forehead, which is you could then go the other way. You could say that you have just maximum back of head and you have zero forehead. We need a new classification.
Where the wrinkles stop when you raise your eyebrows.
Oh, that's quite good. So there's a different musculature at work.
Yeah, exactly. Like where the skin movement is no longer influenced by what the eyebrows can
outside of eyebrow control. Okay. Yeah. I like that. I can feel it.
Once your fingers are in your hairline, you can't really move them with your eyebrows, but when you move down like even half an inch, you can. So.
Jamie's nailed this. So if you have no hairline, place the fingertips on the head, and when you can stop feeling the influence of the eyebrows on the musculature below the skin of the head, that's where it stops. And then draw a line in removable marker, and then do the same test with the fingers to find out. Yeah, and it'll all be on the website.
Permanent marker. Otherwise, people will think you've been, especially if it's a dashed line, people will think you've been to Turkey and that you are about to get a transplant.
They will indeed. Yes.
Would you consider doing that if you lost your hair, or would you just go bald?
I had this the other day. I genuinely, because I don't think my hairline's receded at all. And my dad, I don't think it has. And my dad has still got loads of hair. So my dad is like in his 60s, and he hasn't lost any hair. It's thinned, but he hasn't lost any. And then the other day I was like, I don't know. A lot of my identity is tied to my hair, which is kind of sad. From a very young age, I've always had loads of hair, and my son now, both of them have got they're big on the hair front. And so I was like, I don't know what I would do. I think I would just cut it all off. I think I'd just embrace it and wear a hat. I think I'd do the Tim Pool thing. I'd wear a beanie or a baseball cap.
Would you do the compensate with a beard move?
No, it makes me look old. I've got like some white in the beard now, and it makes me look old. So
okay. Interesting. Well,
we've got Vigilant Knight in chat just said, have they already said everything they could about Concord? We've now moved on to foreheads and Rihanna and I'm sorry. But at the top of the show, first thing we talked about was Concord. Go back and you can get stuck into that. We're in a different place now. We've been chatting for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it's nearly midnight, and we're losing the plot a little. And
that's probably the wake up call that we needed to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to blame it on a medicinal delirium that has been persistent through about the last hour and a half of this podcast, and I'm going to apologise for. But with that, Jonesy, unless you've got anything else to add on hairlines, Turkish hair transplants, or DEI castings for prominent adaptations of video games, then I'd say we call this a podcast.
I think you're right. I think that's a good place to draw the line.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this last couple of hours, and for offering all your wonderful insights, opinions, your sense of humour, your joie de vivre.
Thank you, mate. Thank you for presenting, doing a sterling job as always.
Not at all. And thank you for joining us on what has been a slightly longer and wilder than anticipated ride. But look, we made it, and we made it together. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy the show. And remember to come back, however you choose to enjoy the SuperShow podcast, same place, same time next week, where, with any luck, we'll have some hot and fresh opinions on one of mine and Josie's most anticipated releases of the year, Astrobot, and happy Astro Day on Friday the 6th to anyone that celebrates, which should, by